Welcome to Clause 8, the #1 podcast on intellectual property. This special edition comes from the VIA Licensing Alliance Bridge Summit 2025 in San Francisco, where innovators, policymakers, and industry leaders explored the most pressing challenges and opportunities in SEP licensing today. Hosted by Eli Mazour and brought to you by TradeSpace, where ideas take flight.
We're lucky to be joined by Garrard Beeney at VLA's Bridge Summit in San Francisco. Thank you so much for coming on Clause 8.
My pleasure. Delighted to be here.
So can you tell us what brings you to the Bridge Summit?
I think, first of all, I'm privileged to represent VIA for a number of years and a number of its endeavors in patent pools. But second of all, and more significantly, the summit attracts really the leaders in the IP world. And as we try to navigate a worldwide environment for IP value and enforcement and other issues related to IP, it's almost essential to attend the VIA conference.
So I saw you started Sullivan Cromwell's IP practice. When people think of Sullivan Cromwell, I think they think of a big New York corporate firm. I guess, can you tell us the story? How'd you end up starting an IP practice there?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but it goes back a ways. I started as a young lawyer doing some antitrust work and was very fortunate to be retained by a couple of companies who were subject to a Department of Justice antitrust investigation into a joint licensing program. And at the time, people seem to forget, but many years ago, there was a real antagonism toward the legality of joint licensing programs, and that certainly existed when I got hired. And this is going back, I hate to admit.
Is that an early word for a patent pool? Joint licensing program? Yeah.
This is going back, as I say, I hate to admit, probably to about 1988 or 89. But we navigated that successfully. And when the MPEG-2 standard was announced, the group that I'd had some work with in the past came and asked us to contribute ideas to how to solve what has now become known as the patent thicket, but didn't then. And we were fortunate to work with a group to form MPEG-LA to do the MPEG-2 licensing program. And when it came time a couple of years later, when the PC industry was reluctant to take a license, we were hired to do the patent infringement cases against Dell and Compaq, and that started our IP practice. So that's kind of that's the history.
Yeah, so your entry to the IP world was through patent pools, so that's pretty cool from the beginning, I guess, in the modern era. How have you seen, I guess, patent pools, the role that they have played over the 20 years and how they've evolved?
It's a very interesting question. The basic template that the MPEG-2 licensors agreed to, and the United States Antitrust Division and the EC competition authorities and the Japanese Fair Trade Commission all signed off on, has pretty much stayed the same. But I think as the market's developed over the 27 years since that structure was put together, there have been a lot of developments to try to meet market needs. Some break down a little bit in focusing on only standard essential patents and licensees looking for implementation patents so that they're covered. There have been a lot of different types of technologies that have been covered by the pools, some pools forming over non-standardized technologies, which present their own challenges. And most importantly, perhaps, has been the expansion of the focus on the evaluation of pools from a pretty much U.S.-centric point of view to now really a global point of view involving Chinese authorities, Korean, European, American, Brazilian, UPC, German. So it's really become a real international business, and points out really the importance of conferences like the summit that brings together people from all of those places so we can share ideas and get brought up to speed as to what's happening in all these places.
You mentioned, I guess, our conversation in the beginning was you got involved when some thought that patent pools shouldn't exist in the first place, and now you're kind of involved in some of those discussions around the world. Where I guess similar ideas, and especially on the standard essential patents fronts, we saw some proposals in the U.S. and in Europe being proposed and withdrawn. I guess, where do you think things stand? Where do you think things will go in the future? I guess.
Yeah, so, that also is a really good question. I think there is an inordinate and I think somewhat detrimental focus on what's not working in the market. It really, if you do a dispassionate look at it, and you don't listen to rabble-rousers on both sides, the system really is working. There are thousands of consensual licenses entered into through pool licensing. The amount of friction is low. And if you take, for example, just video codecs, the way the licensing market and the revenues from fair licensing has fueled innovation, not just from a technical point of view, where you have MPEG-2, MPEG-4, AVC, HEVC, VVC, and all the other standards that the MPEG group has put out, but it's also, fueled a lot of innovation in the products that incorporate the technologies. And I'm fearful a bit that, perhaps particularly the European Commission is more focused on the few disruptions in the system and is using really, to use a phrase, a sledgehammer to cure what really needs, a very small fly swatter. So I think we should not overregulate the market. My view is when governments and agencies to use a loaded word, interfere with the free market, that sometimes less positive things can come out of it. And I think if you look at the SEP regulations in Europe, and if you look at some of the court decisions in the UK and in China and elsewhere, I think there ought to be more of a push to allowing the market to solve the frictions that exist, because it's really only a small part of the overall market, which is really functioning at a very effective, efficient level to the benefit of innovators, implementers, and consumers.
And those, like I mentioned, those EU proposals got withdrawn. So are you optimistic about the direction? I think in the U.S. it was back and forth. And do you think they're hearing the message, I guess, the policymakers that are involved and understanding it better?
I think so, although I do think that the European Commission, basically mimicking the Bundeskartellamt's acceptance of the automotive licensing negotiation group proposal, really misses the mark. Just to the opposite, though, if you look at what's happened just this last week in the United States, a very high official in the Department of Justice Antitrust Division gave a speech, very much that I think sets the tone for the current administration's view that innovation and patenting innovation and fueling the resources that allow for innovation are very important to protect. It was a very powerful speech, particularly addressing the efforts by some implementers to take over a market and compel royalty-free licensing. And it was one of the first times that you saw an agency in any government recognizing explicitly the way royalty-free compelled licensing can choke off innovation. And so that, along with the Department of Justice statement of interest in the Radiant Samsung case, also within the last couple of months, that argued that injunction should be available for standard essential patents. I think you see the U.S. recognizing the significance of intellectual property and the fact that innovation should be protected, where I'm not sure that message is really being heard by everybody in the European community. There are, certainly talk about how important innovation is to the European economy. And then on the other hand, you've got some people within the European Commission that are adopting positions that at least seem to me to be depressing the fair value of intellectual property, which will have the natural effect of choking off innovation.
So it seems a mixed story, but a lot of good happening in the U.S.
Yeah.
This is the third Bridge Summit. What are your impressions being here this year about, the mood in the ecosystem, maybe from licensors and licensees and administrators and so forth? I guess what's the mood like, and What's your impression from that?
Well, far be it from me to opine on what the collective mood is of hundreds of people, but nevertheless, I think people are still looking for ways to address some of the friction that goes on in the system to make it as smooth as possible. I think it's very important for innovators and implementers to listen to each other, and I think a format like the VIA Summit, it can almost be equated to the need to train the AI models. You get input from a couple of hundred people who are attending the conference, all of whom are knowledgeable in their field, all of whom are knowledgeable in the geographic areas from where they come to. And the more people you can listen to at these summits that VIA puts on, the more you can, I think, come out with an educated, measured view of how we might solve some of the remaining problems we still have.
Great point to end on. Thank you so much for joining Close 8. I know it's a busy summit, so thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Always glad to talk about these things. Thanks.
This is great. Thank you. So we're at the VLA's Bridge Summit in San Francisco, and we're lucky to be joined with John Sideris from Philips, which is obviously an active participant in what VLA is. John, thank you so much for joining Close 8.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, Eli. Happy to be here.
So, John, can you tell us what brings you to the Bridge Summit?
Sure. Be happy to tell you. So Philips is an active member in patent pools. We are currently participating in about 6 of the VIA patent pools. And my role within Philips is to represent Philips at these patent pool meetings. So we come for that. But in addition, one of the big benefits of being at the summit is that there are lots of colleagues in our industry who also attend both other patent pool meetings and the conference that occurs on the final day of the summit. And it's a great opportunity to network, to discuss open issues with people face to face, and make the kind of progress you simply cannot do when you try to do the same by video or phone.
So before we started recording, you were telling me a bit about your story. You've been involved with the modern era of patent pools from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you've seen it evolve over the years?
Yeah, close to the beginning. The first modern era patent pool launched in 1997. It was the MPEG-2 video pool, launched by MPEG LA.
Which is, of course, one of the companies that now makes up
Yes,
VLA.
Yeah. So VIA LA acquired MPEG LA about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I got involved with patent pools in about 1997. My first task was to write the agreements to forming this other pool that was launched for the cellular space, the handset licensing particularly. That pool was called the 3G patent pool. So I wrote the contracts for the formation of that pool and the license agreements, things of that nature. Then I got involved with the MPEG-2 video pool to get my employer at that time, Alcatel, into the pool as a licensor. So that meant mining the portfolio of Alcatel, finding what we believe to be essential patents, convincing the evaluator of the essentiality, and then getting us in as a member. And that took a few years, but we succeeded. And from there, I also then got involved in the audio pool of VIA licensing, which was their first pool.
The other half of VLA.
Yeah. Today it's the unified AAC pool. Yeah. Back then it was not unified. It was MPEG-2 audio, MPEG-4 audio, and some tools related to those technologies. And then when I went to work for Philips, I got involved with Sysvel because Philips was in the pools of Sysvel at that time.
And Sysvel is a big, I guess, European pool administrator.
Yeah. European-based pool administrator. Did a great job for us. Philips licensing our patents, just like VIA has done, and MPEG-LA. Basically, I can say that all of these pools do a good job of licensing a licensor's patents and helping the industry reduce friction in getting deals done. But then since being involved with Sysvel, we were one of the we being Philips were one of the founders and formation partners of the Access Advance HEVC pool. I was involved with that. And then Philips also joined the Avanci vehicle licensing pool. So fortunately, it's a niche field, patent pools, but I've had a broad spectrum of experience across the different aspects related to patent pools and many of the different licensing administrators.
So what do you think spurred this growth of patent pools over your career, and
I see.
how has it evolved, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, what spurred it is the emergence of more complex technologies, the wireless technologies, the video codecs technologies becoming more complex with every evolution, and the same for audio. And when there's more complexity, that means there's more technology that's invested to make these standards. And more technology means more inventions, more innovations. And then finally, that means more patents. So with all these larger investments in technologies, the end result being more patents that come out of it in order to get the return on such investments. And then the need to get that return through either bilateral licensing or through patent pools. Now, what you have is many companies that have developed these patents. Some are small. They don't have the manpower to license them themselves bilaterally. Others are big enough where they have the internal personnel and know-how to do it. But patent pools basically came in to help fill the gap of licensing patents for those who didn't have either the in-house ability or didn't want the in-house ability to be used for that, or simply needed this larger organization to pool the patents and take care of licensing many licensees at the same time. Now, Philips is an organization with a very large in-house intellectual property capability, but nonetheless, Philips's philosophy is to support patent pools. We were one of the first owners of MPEG LA when it created that first pool back in 1997, and we continue to be owners. We are a part owner of VIA. We are a part owner of Access Advance. We continue to invest in the development of these patent pools because we believe it is the most balanced solution to licensing patents, in that it creates a level market for a level playing field, I should say, for the licensees, because they all take the same terms and conditions. It reduces the friction between the bilateral licensing may result in, because people feel I have to negotiate individually with many different patent owners, whereas they do the one-stop shop at the patent pools and reduce their manpower needs to get the licenses that they should get.
So I want to return to that, but I guess I want to talk a little bit about Philips, because I guess people who are outside of the licensing space, when they think of Philips, maybe they think of the brand on the light bulbs or some medical
Correct.
devices, obviously
Yes.
a very old European company. Can you tell us a little bit about how did Philips end up in the licensing their technology, and why is it, I guess,
Sure.
such an important part of the business?
Yeah, it goes back to what I mentioned. If you invest a lot in R&D, you need a vehicle to get the return on that investment. It occurs commercially in your products,
Yeah.
but it also occurs through the licensing of patents. I can't speak with knowledge as to the very earliest licensing of Philips, but my recollection goes back to the late 1970s time frame, early 80s, when the CDs were developed for the marketplace. And that was largely a joint effort between Philips and Sony. And they created the CD players, which then evolved and grew into the DVD and Blu-ray players.
Yeah.
And that technology was then licensed to bring the technology to other companies to make CD players, so that whoever bought their music on a CD could find a CD player, whether it was built by Philips in Europe or Sony in Japan, but to find that technology worldwide. So in order to spread that technology, Philips and Sony together licensed the CD-DVD technology. That's my recollection of, let's say, earliest modern day licensing of Philips. That then evolved into both Sony and Philips, in fact, were joint owners of MPEG-LA when that was formed in 1997. So it continued a trend of getting a return on investment through the licensing of patents.
And obviously there's companies with, I guess, a pure pedigree of being implementers where they just create products based on others' technology, or innovators. I guess what kind of perspective do you think Philips has that maybe is unique, that it made products and knows what it takes to sell a product, the margins that are involved in that? Because I guess that's a complaint that you hear from implementers a lot of time, that by the time they pay all the technology licenses, there's not any money left over. But I guess what perspective do you think Philips has on that?
Yeah, I can answer that. Well, ideally, these companies should be factoring into their bill of materials, just like the cost of the plastic for a display screen or the power module. They should be factoring into their bill of materials before they put the product on the market what the cost of intellectual property will be, because that is a component. It should go into the bill of materials. We Philips do that. When we are going to put a new product on the market, we do a risk assessment, it's called, to understand who will have patents in this space, who are we likely going to need licenses from, seeing their patents, and what might that cost? And that gets factored in. And I can tell you, for example, years ago, Philips was thinking of making tablets, but we did the risk analysis. We found that, we weren't going to be able to make a competitive product when we took into account all the intellectual property costs that we would have to pay. And let me give you an example on that. That's quite interesting. They are factored into DVD players. Today, if you go out to buy a DVD player, the least expensive one you will find is still about $29 or euros, basically the same equivalency there. Why haven't CD and DVD players dropped down to the $5, $10 price range? The plastic and electronics is only about $5. It's the fact that the DVD manufacturers do include the IP costs. And they tend to be, depending on whether you have cross licenses in place or whatever, they tend to be $15 to $20 or euros per device. So here, the costs are factored in. It's not part of the profit margin. The profit margin on $5 of electronics and plastics is, $1, whatever. It's added to the cost of the components, and that cost is then in the final product. So there isn't this complaint, why are you asking me for IP fees? I don't have it in my profit margin. Because they took the correct approach and put it in their bill of materials for the final product that's out on the marketplace.
Yeah, we're not that far, I guess, from Silicon Valley, and some critics say that the approach there might be called efficient infringement, where they put out a product and then worry about the IP. Have you noticed that starting to shift to more of, I guess, what the approach with maybe Philips takes of pricing the IP into cost of products, maybe thanks to patent pools and stuff like that? Or is
a shift, hard to say. It depends on the entity. There are companies that take a good faith approach to it, factor it in early on. There are others who want to get the commercial advantage of not paying for as long as they can. And they get an advantage over their competitors who are good faith licensees and are agreeing to pay the IPR costs. And if you take something like a mobile phone, if one company can hold out for a product cycle, but their competitors are paying, they get to get market share through the lower pricing. The other guys who have to pay, if they can't afford, and if the other guys are also patent owners, the ones who contributed to technology, if they're not getting the return on investment that they can reinvest to the next product cycle, they could miss a product cycle.
Yeah.
So if you're making phones 4G, you can't afford to miss 5G. So there has to be this healthy ecosystem of a return on investment, because it is actually what funds the next level of innovation. But there are some companies that try to take advantage of that and think that they can hold out longer. Their competitors who are paying license fees or trying to get a return on their investment at the same time can't. And if you lose a product cycle, you're almost out of the market.
And do you think the way that things are now, obviously, because like you said, the funding needs to go back to the innovators for there to be the next generation of technology. And if companies can hold out, then they're not contributing to that. I guess the way things stand today, what do you think about the balance in terms of encouraging companies to, I guess, behave responsibly?
Yeah. How to encourage companies? As I said, most of them are good actors. They'll use some holdout to negotiate the best they can. We understand that. Others will take an attitude that if you don't litigate me, and I've heard this said back to me, well, if you're not going to sue me, why would I pay you?
Yeah.
Well, because you should respect intellectual property is the answer in my head. But so you're still going to have a few actors that will try to take advantage of not paying to gain market share. Those are who we call the unwilling licensees. And those are the ones that end up in litigation. Not all of them, but some of them do. And at some point, maybe later, we'll talk about how many deals get done without litigation versus the number that have to end up through litigation, because the news is only about the deals that get done after litigation, not the ones that are quietly done without any contentious fights.
And you mentioned, obviously, that Philips, you guys have a team there that probably could do direct licensing, not go through patent pools. And my understanding is that you think, is it because of a long-term health of the ecosystem? You think it actually helps Philips in the long run to create these patent pools?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we do have both people who can and do bilateral licensing, including myself. My activity in Philips is to manage its role in the audio and video codec pools. But there are licensees who say, I don't want to take the pool license for whatever reasons, and I negotiate with them bilaterally. So we do both, but our strong preference is the health of the patent pools, because it's just more efficient. It produces more uniformity in terms of leveling the playing field for all competitors. It gives them certainty, because if the patent pool is formed early enough, they know, okay, I see there are 30 licensors there. That's 80 or 90% of the patent owners. They're charging X. I can have a general idea. This is, I'm going to pay X plus a little more for the ones that may stay out of patent pools. But it gives the market guidance and stability also. So we think it's the best solution. It doesn't solve every problem, but it solves a lot of them.
One of the other things you mentioned is all the different pool administrators that Philips works with. I guess that's one of the things you hear is, there's this pool and that pool, and they all want. I guess, from Philips' perspective, is there a reason that you work with different pool administrators and you are involved, I guess, in different pools that some think are maybe for similar technologies and stuff like that?
Well, the basis of, we don't select it based on the administrator. We select it based on the technology that the pool is licensing. And if we have a patent position in that technology, then our incentive is to join. So we happen to work with all of the major licensing agents, mainly because of their individual pool programs, not because we think one licensing administrator is more preferred over the other.
Yeah. And obviously via MPEG, they merged.
Yes.
And there's talk, should there be more consolidation, or what's the future hold? You've been from beginning, I guess, what do you think, I guess, is the future of patent pools?
Okay. Interesting question. I don't think you need to consolidate licensing agents. Where there is an issue has been in one or two technologies where there are multiple pools covering the same technology. They have had different patent owners. In one case, it was the same patent owners in both pools. That caused a lot of consternation and confusion in the industry. It was unfortunate, but that's where the consolidation needs to be, such that we're offering a one-stop shop for a single technology. Yeah.
So I guess, what do you think the future will look like in terms of, as new technologies come to develop? Obviously, these pool administrators are coming up with new new pools and so forth.
Yeah.
I guess, what do you see in the future? I guess how it will.
A continuation. It is a successful model. It's not a fault of the pools that there are more technologies. These smartphones keep incorporating yet a new technology or a new feature, and that there's some intellectual property behind that feature, behind that technology. And again, pools are probably the most efficient way to license that technology. So I think that will continue. Let's say one thing that might be considered if the antitrust issues could be worked out is to have a product pool, meaning if I'm going to make a smartphone and I need patent licenses for the video codec, for the audio codec, for the communication technology, the 3G, 4G, 5G, etc., a pool that could offer a one-stop shop for all those technologies.
Yeah.
So the smartphone maker doesn't have to go to one licensing administrator for the audio codec, another one for the video, and a third one for the wireless patents.
Yeah.
That could be something that would be interesting. There have been, let's say, baby steps towards that in the past, but I think there are difficult antitrust concerns to overcome. So if that can be managed, that might be a good thing for an industry where there's more and more technologies being put in this smartphone device.
That's interesting because the companies who sell the final products, they complain about there being too many pools, but also if there's consolidation, then I guess like you said, that might raise antitrust concerns that they might be worried about.
Today, the position of the antitrust authorities is a pool should not try to license complementary technologies, meaning more than one technology. Yeah. They should stay focused on one.
And obviously, most of the people here are veterans, I guess, of the licensing on both sides. But any ideas about, and obviously the name of the summit is the Bridge Summit. Any thoughts about, I guess, how can the bridge between licensors and licensees be strengthened overall, but also, companies that aren't licensees yet, how can they, what can patent pool administrators or licensors do to kind of...
Well, first off, what's also good about patent pools is a lot of the licensors have developed the technology because they're developing it in a product development cycle. So they are also licensees. So you have licensees in the pool meetings themselves. They have to also be licensors. But that brings also a balance of issues being discussed and weighed and factored into decisions. So you have that group of licensees. But I see bringing in licensees who are not also happen to be licensors, that's more difficult. I would think what VIA and other administrators can do is more of an outreach to them. What I do see is that with this extra day of the conference, you do get some just pure licensees that come for it. And so I think that goes towards the direction of getting licensees involved. And one step further could be, to the extent it's not done enough now, is to bring at these conferences more voices from the licensee side, to invite organizations like RPX who represent licensees. And they do come to some of these. And that is some of the outreach that is done, and it's positive. FSA is an organization that is focused on the implementer side. Bring them, have them speak at these panels.
Fair Standard Alliance, which is
thank you. AOM, Alliance for Open Media, that is developing alternative video codecs that they want to put out there as royalty-free. Bring them. And personally, I can speak that when I go to conferences and I hear someone from FSA or an implementer speaking, it's really good to hear because I want to understand what their problems are and therefore take that into account in my future activities. And I know what the licensors' issues are and what their desires are. It's the licensees that I don't hear enough of. And so even there's a conference coming up in Europe in a couple of weeks. I don't remember the name or details, but I thought, there's going to be a lot of licensees here, FSA and others. I want to go to that because I want to hear what they're going to say, what their issues are. And that's really helpful. So to answer your question, the more that VIA can invite the licensee side of the perspectives here, the better for the industry as a whole.
That's a great note to end on about listening to each other. But any final thoughts, anything else comes to mind that you want to share about the ecosystem, the Bridge Summit, or
some of the resolutions for the different sides of the table of licensors versus licensees? Some of the resolutions that were recently tried have been through legislation. In particular, the proposal, the SEP proposal, as it was known in the European Commission put out. And I think the more government gets involved, the less it's going to work. It's going to just complicate things. It's going to construe things in ways that people don't understand, that the reality of the market doesn't work that way. The market-driven solutions are the better way to go. So less legislation getting their hands into the middle of this, the better is to have a market-driven solution. And to emphasize that, what we hear about is largely these lawsuits going on, in particular complaints about that in Europe, people get an injunction and it's a gun to my head for a hyper-FRAND rate.
Yeah.
That's not understood. You don't get an injunction if you're not FRAND. You can't get a hyper-FRAND rate and an injunction. It doesn't work that way. But some legislators may not understand that.
Yeah.
And here's also part of the market facts. If you take the patent pools that are in existence through these different licensing administrators, you have the AVC pool with several thousand licensees, AAC, 950 licensees, HEVC, 400 licensees. If you take the number of licenses that are done just by the number of licensees that are known, plus the renewals, you add them up, a rough count puts it over like 10 to 15,000 licenses that are done without litigation.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the bilateral licenses that, are hard to count. But add a few more hundred of those over the years. And what you have are, thousands and thousands of licenses that are done by the market without litigation. What we do see is, there are, a few tens of litigations per year going on around the world. Those are the noisiness of those litigations are what get the attention. But nobody's talking about, the market has solved licensing positions of both sides amicably without contention in the tens of thousands.
Yeah. Well, John, that was a great point to end on. Thank you so much for joining Clause 8. It's great to hear your story, a bit of patent pools, and hear your story, Philip. So thank you for joining Clause 8.
It's my pleasure to be here. It was a great discussion. Thank you, Eli.